Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Williams. I'm your host, your room host today for this presentation, and it is the keys to QM implementation, driving your quality assurance goal to the next level with research-based practices. And with that said, I will hand it off to your presenters.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Welcome, everybody. I hope that you had a great break and a little bit of a rest, and I hope that you're having a good conference. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk a little bit about implementing QM and the research-based science behind that. My name is Bethany Simunich. I'm QM's Director of Research and Innovation. And I'd also like my colleagues to introduce themselves. I have two great co-presenters here today. So Beth, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Beth McMahon, and I am a retired community college faculty member, and I work with the research colleagues on projects now and then.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Barb Altman. I'm a research colleague with QM and Associate Professor of Management at Texas A&M University Central Texas, which is the campus you see behind me, in our College of Business Administration. I'm also on the Quality Matters Academic Advisory Committee. So we have three objectives for our session today: to describe the people, processes, and policies that enable institutions get to higher levels of QM implementation, to explain ways to overcome the barriers and maintain momentum given what's going on in your own institution, and to identify finally where your institution is on your implementation progress. So a quick poll for you all, if you could put in the chat, there's 4 questions here. Does your institution have clear goals for faculty professional development? Does your institution have clear goals for internal course reviews? Does your institution have a dedicated budget for quality assurance? And does your institution have a designated leader for your quality assurance activities? What we would like to do is, for those that you can answer yes, please put that question number in the chat. This will become clear a little bit later when we talk about all the different things that we looked at in this research. So let's see how the chat's coming in.
And as you all are typing this in the chat, if there's any question that you thought, well, I don't know, that's a good question, make a note of that, because that is a really good question to take back to your folks at your campus and at your institution, and see whether or not, for example, you have goals for some of these things. So looking at the chat, wow, I see several 1, 2, 3, 4s. So goals for all of those, some where it's a little bit mixed. It seems like everybody so far at least is putting not number 4, so that you have that institutional leader for QA. And most often that's the QMC. Give me a thumbs up or a yes if that is the case for you in your institution in the chat. Is that institutional leader for online quality assurance, is that the QMC? Okay, Denise, you're saying yes. Thumbs up from Robert. Okay. 4 and yes. All right, fantastic. So as Barb said, we're going to come back to this. But that actually, really does reflect a lot of our findings from some of this research. So that's great. So first, we're going to dive into the theoretical background for this and looking at the models of quality assurance implementation. And I'm going to start off by talking about implementing QM specifically. So we're going to be talking about quality assurance more broadly in higher education, online quality assurance more broadly. But we wanted first to start talking about what we all know and love, Quality Matters, and that looks specifically at course design quality assurance. So what is pictured here really kind of gives you an idea for how QM might be implemented at an institution and the trajectory that that implementation follows. So for example, you might start off just introducing Quality Matters to faculty, to DL staff. And again, you can see here, in the text on the screen, that here's when you would also want to identify that institutional leader for implementation. That then moves on to looking at how you're going to structure this process for course design quality assurance. And as you can see there, again, from the smaller text, it needs to be contextualized to your institution. So it should fit the needs of your staff, the needs of your organization, align with your strategic plan, for example. And you can look, for example, at professional development that QM offers, ways that you really want to embed QM standards within the design process. And then that ramps you up to defining and using data. So anybody that has attended a presentation from me, I love talking about data and collecting institutional data. Yesterday, I talked about the QM data dashboards, which helps you, if you're a QMC, start to collect and report out on that data. Because anytime you create a plan for quality assurance, you simultaneously want to create a plan for how you're going to evaluate the efficacy of your quality assurance efforts. And that moves on then to certification and showcase. So, doing formal reviews, maybe preceding that with informal reviews internal to your institution. But then once you do get courses certified, sharing that broadly and widely, because that's a message not just to folks at your institution like faculty and staff, but also to current and prospective students that your institution values online quality assurance. And then finally, ramping up to that highest level where you are achieving that culture of quality. So for those of you that heard Deb's opening keynote at the conference yesterday, she talked about that culture of quality and that concept of culture of quality, which we're going to talk about a little bit more as well. So this reflects something, speaking of Deb, so Dr. Deb Adair, our fearless leader here at Quality Matters, she actually came up with what you see on the screen, which is a theoretical model for quality assurance for various things at the level of higher education institutions. So what we just looked at prior to this was a specific QM application, but this continuum, and the abbreviation for this, or the acronym, is CEQA, C-E-Q-A, Continuum of Excellence for Quality Assurance. You can see that that kind of reflects what I just talked about in that QM specific way, where you're starting maybe with ad hoc efforts, maybe you haven't created a strategic plan for how you're going to roll this out. Then you move on to, really getting that baseline for quality assurance and making sure that you've met minimum standards. Then looking at how you can improve. So that's that continuous improvement aspect. Moving on then to benchmarking, where maybe you're looking at your efforts in conjunction with peer institutions, in conjunction with other ways, even in the popular media like US News and World Reports, you might be looking at online programs, for example, and benchmarking how well they're doing against others. And then finally, when it gets to the highest level, yet again, we're talking about creating that culture of quality, and through that, really achieving institutional change. And that's what Barb's going to talk about next. Barb?
Yes.
Go ahead. This is for you.
Sorry. Okay, so the CEQA is grounded in theories of change management and work on diffusion of innovation. I teach courses in organizational development and change, so this is really my thing. This model can be used as a general model for QA implementation in higher education, not just specifically for QM. We know from related research that there are many common issues in doing a change initiative like this, and we're going to talk about those today. We did a pilot project on the CEQA and Quality Matters that was published last year, and it revealed that even though this shows this to be a linear path, it really is often not. It's often fits and starts, and how it is led is a really critical factor. So there are many models of change management that we looked at through the course of both the pilot project and this more current research. But the one that is most currently cited is a model by Cotter, which is an 8-step model, beginning with a sense of urgency for the change, building a coalition, forming a strategic vision, enlisting a group of people to be early adopters, removing any barriers, getting short wins and celebrating those wins, and then sustaining momentum, and finally institutionalizing the change where you can have organizational learning. You see some asterisks by certain steps on this process, and those were ones that we found in our pilot project on this, looking at some institutions that had already done a lot of QM implementation. Those were some of the things that we found at those institutions, was a sense of urgency, that coalition, enlisting early adopters, overcoming the change and getting faculty buy-in, and very much celebrating short-term wins. So for this newer research that we're going to talk about in depth today, we did a very deep dive into the change management literature specifically related to universities and higher education institutions. There is a separate literature on this, and what we found in looking at this literature, and I think some of you will start nodding your heads when you hear some of this, is top-down initiatives in universities do not work well, okay? A little bit like herding cats. And that was very clear in the literature that you've got to do this differently in higher education institutions. You need leaders that have emotional intelligence. And there is a word in the literature called commiseration that I'm not sure it's a proper word, but it's in the literature about this in terms of leaders being very attuned to what everyone in the organization is saying and helping to foster this initiative going forward. Another critical thing from the higher ed literature is that leadership from below, okay, and staff that can bridge what sort of the past has been and going forward, and also faculty members' involvement in helping to shape the change initiative. Some key leverage points that were common in the change management literature in higher education: faculty professional development is key, designated funding is key, which we just asked you about, and rewarding and disseminating exemplary practices is key. So we want you to share a little bit in the chat, those of you who have been involved in QM implementation, either as the implementers or the leaders from below or the middle. What barriers to change have you encountered or overcome when implementing QM at your institution? So we just kind of want to get a reality check here of what you guys have been up against.
Okay, already seeing some comments. Yeah, okay, so Arlene, you're saying that you cannot require PD for faculty. That was the case at my previous institution as well. So it's a lot more carrots because you'll never have the stick, but that's okay because, as Barb mentioned, sometimes those requirements come with that top-down approach, which has proven not to be as successful. But yeah, bringing faculty to the table when it's optional. Faculty acceptance of guidelines. Okay, so these are, I think, both related to faculty buy-in. Faculty don't always see the value of QM because it wasn't their idea. Again, the ramifications of that top-down approach, changes in institutional leadership, that can be a big one, especially if that institutional leadership no longer supports quality assurance and or the previous administration maybe was involved really in implementing a QA and you kind of lost your leader. Limited support staff. Yeah, and also, detractors. So, if somebody really has never been involved in QM, but they already come to the table and they have a very negative idea about it. I personally wrote, something about my own experience that really can help you have conversations about that. I'll put that in the chat later on when I'm not speaking, but it was called Why QM because I had to have these conversations at my campus as well. Faculty would come in and I understood the concerns, but they didn't know anything about QM and they're like, but I already have issues. And yeah, they can really derail efforts. Limited support staff, right? So sometimes it's, that burden, that effort can really rest on one person. And how do you move that forward? Very, very great barriers you all have identified. Let's take that back to our latest research efforts here on implementing QM. So as Barb mentioned, we had done a previous study. So this has been part of Quality Matters research agenda for a number of years, obviously starting with Deb creating that CEQA, that continuum of excellence. And then, Barb and I started to work on it. Beth has been integral in this for many, many years. And we really wanted to know, how does this play out at QM member institutions? And it was all with the eye towards helping you do this work at your campus. So I have been in this role, Beth has been in this role, as has Barb, and we know the difficulties and the barriers. So there was an opportunity that came along, the American Journal of Distance Education, fantastic journal, one of the premier journals in online learning. They actually are putting out a special issue on policy leadership and organizational change. So, the three of us thought this is an excellent opportunity to follow up on that pilot project, that work that we had done before, and using this case study approach of QM membership, looking at the QM framework and how that really, either integrates or reifies what we see in that sequence, that continuum. And it was also an opportunity to talk to new audiences about implementation for course quality design. So one of the things that we were looking at in the study is this presence of an implementation plan and also the different aspects. So for those of you that are QMCs, you know that in the free QMC training, if you've taken that, that's where we begin to talk about developing this implementation plan for your campus. So in the paper, we define it. It's a plan for course design, quality assurance, and continuous improvement that, number one, is tied to your institutional goals, your strategic visioning at your institution. Number two, it includes specific targets, metrics, and data to evaluate progress and efficacy. So remember when I said earlier, you have to also decide how you're going to collect data to measure the efficacy of your efforts. So that's included in the plan. And then third, something that was created in collaboration with your institutional stakeholders. So bringing in this idea of collaboration and inclusion from the start, and again, working against that top-down approach, which really just does not work as well. And even if it does work well in the sense that you get some things accomplished, it will not lead to that institutional change that's built around that culture of quality. So the implementation plan also includes some specifics like professional development planned for the next year or more that really supports your institutional goals for quality assurance, an associated budget. You do need some budget support in order to carry out some of those things that may be on your plan. And that's not an afterthought. That has to be integral to creating that plan. And then finally, it targets goals and metrics for internal and or certified course reviews. Okay, so I'm going to poll 2. Does your institution have an implementation plan for online course quality? Just give us a yes or no in the chat. And this could be something that maybe was created, with the implementation plan that's in the QMC training. It could be something that was created just at your institution using an institutional process or template, something such as that. So I'm seeing some yeses already. That's good. Okay, so in progress, that's fantastic. It means that you're talking about it. For those that said no, this is a great conversation to take back to your campus and say, what are our goals? Especially now that we are, on the, I'm not going to say we're at the end of the pandemic, but we're on the other side. And we know that online learning is going to continue at institutions, maybe that didn't have a strong online presence before. We still want to serve those students. We know it's online enrollment that is still growing faster, as we're seeing declines overall, though. So your institutional strategy and approach might have changed. If you don't have a plan, I think this is a great time to start that conversation. Okay, Barb, back to you for the next couple slides. Tell us about culture. And you're muted.
So at the root of all this, really, in terms of change management, in terms of QA implementation, this is all about your organization's culture. You may already have a culture of quality when it comes to other kinds of initiatives. You may not. But we really need to get back to the roots again, to the theory of what does organizational culture mean, okay? So organizational culture, and this is from the guru of organizational culture, Ed Schein, and now his son, Peter Schein, joins him in the research. It is accumulated shared learning by the organization members that establishes norms. So those norms are things like shared language, how people dialogue, what the reward systems are like, what's accepted behavior, what's not accepted behavior. And another critical thing about organizational culture is what's taught to new members when new members come into the organization. So new members are often sort of inculcated to what is the right way to think and feel and sometimes behave about things. I saw a comment in the chat earlier where somebody was talking about the cult of QM. I'm not sure if QM is a cult, but it might be an issue if some people perceive it that way. But certainly understanding where your organizational culture is at and how much of a change this is one of the critical keys to being successful here. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So, as many of you already know, because you've been involved in implementing QM, which is a culture change usually, changing organizational culture is extremely challenging. It is extremely challenging in higher education institutions. It's hard enough in corporate settings and a little bit easier in small firms, but certainly the literature supports that it's extremely hard in higher education institutions because some of the norms around things like faculty autonomy, definitions of teaching quality, online versus face-to-face are all things that many of you, I'm sure, have been up against when you are starting to talk about some of the things that are critical for instituting a quality culture around online teaching and learning. Next slide, please. So for purposes of the article that Bethany and Beth and I are about to publish in the American Journal of Distance Education, we came up with a definition of culture of quality for in this context, okay? And that means having a significant percent of institutional faculty, staff, and administration collectively working to create guidelines and engage in practices to achieve quality assurance goals. So everybody needs to be working in the same direction, as well as demonstrating and communicating a collective commitment to continuous improvement. So this, again, is something you can take back to your universities and talk about. This is what we mean when we talk about quality of culture for online learning and teaching. And with that, I will turn it back to Bethany.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Barb and Beth, just to let you know, the piece that I had talked about for why quality matters that can really hopefully help you have a good conversation at your campus for faculty that are new to QM or have some questions or concerns. Beth and Barb, I texted that to you. If you can put it in the chat, because I cannot put that in the chat right now because of the screen share. So when we were looking at the big question and wanting to learn more about implementing quality matters, we were looking at specifically what are these drivers of institutional change. So we wanted to look at the people, policies, practices, institutional supports, and also stakeholders that really helped implementation and institutional change. So this was a mixed method study. It included a questionnaire, so a quantitative survey, as well as qualitative interviews. And a little bit about the participants. So what we did, we looked at QM membership that really had those highest levels of activity. And that really was rallied around high activity in QM professional development, internal reviews that were done in the course review management system, and also QM certified reviews. And that yielded us a population of 109 high activity member institutions. So we sent out the survey to these 109 member institutions, to their QMCs. Thank you if you were one of those. And we got a response rate of 39%. So 43 of those QMCs thankfully filled that out for us. And then 17 agreed to also have that follow-up interview. Now here we were a little bit lucky. So even though we only had, a small proportion respond, we were able, because we knew the population, right? We had created the population. We were able to compare the sample between the population, and there was no statistically significant difference. So looking at those high activity variables, we wanted to look at the number of internal QM reviews that were conducted, like I said, in the CRMS, the number of official QM reviews, and then also QM professional development participation. So this was the research question for the quantitative portion. And you can see that it goes back to that big question: what goals, supports, people, policies, and processes are related to higher implementation activity on QM internal reviews, official QM reviews, and QM faculty professional development? So what were some of those institutional characteristics that came out of it? So again, this is for a population of about 109 high activity institutions. So what did those institutions look like? What were some of those characteristics that really might have been some of those ways that implementation was supported and driven at their institution? 60% were 4-year, 86% were public. 86%, so this is kind of interesting, were part of an institutional QM system. So what that allows is several institutions to share resources, share expertise, and share knowledge. So that might also help implementation. They also had a pretty lengthy membership. So very rarely do you see somebody join QM as an institution, and in year one, they're able to just drive everything forward. It really does take a long time because, again, you're trying to build that culture of quality. So the average length of membership was 11 years for those institutions. And then this goes back to that goals question that we'd asked you in the beginning. 73% had clear goals for faculty PD. 70% had clear goals for internal course reviews. 67% had a dedicated budget and an identified leader. So again, going back to that poll question, 72% had more than one QMC, right? So the ability to share that load, right? If you're a QMC, you know the work that's involved. Give me a yes or a thumbs up in the chat if you have more than one QMC at your institution. And I'm also going to pause to give a note here to Kevin. Kevin, I also Skyped you, so maybe you can help me out with posting that link.
I was just doing that right now.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so I see a lot of you saying yes. All right, and Kevin just posted there in the chat. You can see he's the facilitator to facilitator. I do want to, yes, that's great. So that's a little bit of a response piece to, what was some negativity from folks that really don't know QM, have never done it at all. So it seems like many of you have several QMCs. We had that at my institution as well. And I'll tell you, I don't know how I would have survived without having those colleagues to really support those efforts. So if this is something that's possible at your institution, see if you can have additional quality matters coordinators. There really is not a limit to QMCs. A lot of institutions, for example, will have one in individual colleges or programs to help. So looking at those QMC characteristics, speaking of QMCs, about half had served in that role for more than 7 years. So here we start to see a picture of that person that is driving this change. So they had a lot of experience in this, very similar to that length of membership. The vast majority of them had worked in higher education for over a decade. By and large, they were a little bit older. You can see that there's, a fairly good mix there between administrators and IDs, but still predominantly they were administrators. They were also very knowledgeable about QM. They were peer reviewers, they were facilitators, they had taken QMPD. So this starts to reveal this portrait of who that change agent, that leader really should be. A lot of times when an institution joins QM and you have to put down who's going to be the QMC, you're not really sure what that role entails. And maybe you have somebody that's just coming in, they're younger, they're brand new to online learning. That's probably not the individual who's going to be able to bring your stakeholders together and drive change at your institution. You really need somebody who has that experience and that knowledge, as well as that passion for quality online. So looking at the institutional supports here, 70% had an implementation plan. So that's also why we asked you that question. So there is at least a connection. Again, this is not a causal connection, but there is this correlation between having somebody to lead this effort, having a plan for this effort, and then that effort actually coming to fruition at your campus. 63%, so this speaks to that collegiality, that collaboration, had a committee of stakeholders invested in online learning. About 70% had instructional designers that were available to work with the faculty on their course. That is a huge support for faculty. IDs, in so many ways were the heroes of that emergency remote shift. And I think in many good ways, it helped institutions recognize their value. There's also additional supports here, like templates, whether you call them templates, frameworks, whatever it is, whatever language works for you at your institution. But essentially what we're talking about here is something that provides a good organizational and navigational structure, has embedded supports for online students at the institution, support links for academic services and whatnot, but that doesn't interfere with design. So it does not impact faculty freedom and academic freedom. It just gives them a really good head start so they can concentrate on their design and not have to have this web design background where they know the layout. So LMS templates, syllabus templates for online specific policies, and then also having some faculty development staff who are really knowledgeable specifically in online learning teaching strategies. So whether that's in your CTL, your Centers for Teaching and Learning office, or within your DL office, having somebody dedicated that really understands online learning, which is different teaching than face-to-face. Poll number 3. So let's stop and ask you about the supports that you have. And you can just give us a number in the chat there. Does your institution have these types of implementation supports? So LMS template, online syllabus template, committee of stakeholders that are all, really involved in making online learning a success and of high quality at your institution, and then dedicated staff to help with PD for online teaching. Oh my goodness, I'm seeing so many 1, 2, 3, 4s. You are making my heart sing. Okay. I love it. All right. And then, okay, so I'm looking at the ones that are missing. And for those of you that don't have all 4 of them, it seems that committee of stakeholders is something that's missing. This is something that you can work to create. So if you are that institutional leader, you're that QMC, maybe leading that effort, coming together and saying who needs to be at this table, and then creating that table, for them to come to, it's not only going to help you in your work because you can share the work that needs to be done, but it makes sure that it is a collaborative and collegial effort, and you are avoiding that top-down approach, which we know doesn't work. So something to consider if that was the one that you were missing. So we wanted to also present some select correlations that came out of this study. And again, this paper is going to be coming out online at the end of this year, and I think in the print publication at the beginning of the year. If your institution does not have a subscription to the American Journal for Distance Education, the 3 of us, we're authors on the paper. We do have some author copies that we can give out. So please do reach out to one of us if you'd like to read the full results when they come out. So what I wanted to present here are just some select positive correlations between those 3 high activity variables that we looked at, which again, they were internal reviews, formal course reviews, QM certified reviews, and then also professional development. And what were those things positively correlated with? So that first one there, and this is not all of them, these are just, selected ones as the slide title says, ensuring that faculty receive a minimum level of PD for online learning. That speaks to preparedness, right? So that they at least know how the teaching is different, how the design is different for online. Barb mentioned this in the beginning when she was talking about the theoretical background and the research that we have in this area, celebrating your wins. And in this case, that means celebrating faculty achievements. If any of you served in that course representative role and your faculty that has is certified, QM course, give me a yes in the chat. You know how hard that is, how much work it takes to achieve that. Celebrate those achievements. Recognizing faculty's QM work in the reappointment, promotion, and tenure process. Again, recognizing those efforts, recognizing their knowledge and expertise. The availability of some of those supports we talked about, like online course syllabus templates, and then being clear about what those minimum quality standards are. Looking at that second high activity variable of QM certified reviews. Here we see some positive correlations with faculty required to attend one or more QM workshops. That may not work for your institution. You may not have that option, as I did and as we had commented in the chat before. But there are other ways to really recognize faculty and bring them to the table, compensating them for their time. For example, we know how much time can go into a good high quality design. Faculty being encouraged but not required. So for those of you that are at a campus, you know, that like I was, you can't require anything. That's okay. Look, we see the correlation here comes from that encouragement, that carrot, and not from that stick of requirement. The institution being clear in communicating their metrics and goals to students, then also having their participation because they're spending their time in these workshops and other types of PD, making sure that that is also recognized in that reappointment, promotion, and tenure process. Finally, looking at our last high activity variable, professional development or PD. Some of the correlations with that are the acceptance and use of quality standards for online learning. And acceptance implies that there is this collegiality, that we have had some of these crucial conversations at our campus to decide what do we think is quality? Do we all decide that we want to offer quality to our online students? And how are we going to get there? What does that mean? The institution really having a way to track and then formally reward or recognize the fact that faculty had completed workshops, you know, whether even if they were required. Looking at workshops and certifications, again, in that RPT process. And then demonstrating to stakeholders this commitment. So a lot of times we focus these implementation efforts inward at our institution, and we do all this work and we have all this success and we forget to communicate it. So don't forget that one of your largest stakeholders is students. How are you telling students that you are investing in quality, that your faculty care about quality, that your courses are designed well, and that when they enroll at your institution and they take an online course, it is going to be a good learning experience? Especially right now, that will help differentiate your institution, what you offer, from your neighboring institutions and your peer institutions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth for a qualitative portion.
And I just wanted, this is Kevin, I just want to let you know we have about 13 minutes left.
Yes, thanks, Kevin.
You're welcome.
So we did have a number of qualitative interview questions that we explored, as well as the quantitative information that Bethany has shared. So specifically, we were looking at what the supports, people, policies, and practices were that were key drivers, what effect QM implementation had on the institutional culture, and what barriers to QM implementation were experienced. So we had 17 interviews, and I noticed a few names in our group today that were some of those people. So thank you for being part of that. You can advance. So the results, these interviewees then were asked to expand on the answers on their questionnaire, and as a result of coding that qualitative data that we gathered, 4 themes emerged that were related to successful implementation. And these were the people, policies, and practices, a culture shift, and barriers and disruptors. And I'll tell you just a little bit about each one so we can move on to the recommendations. So we had sub-themes that emerged within each of these main themes. And for theme 1, people, champions, and cheerleaders was a very important sub-theme. People used terms like champions and cheerleaders and recruiters and stars, names given to these individuals who are seen as vital to the success of the initiative. These are individuals who often had a real big passion for their quality assurance. Another theme, sub-theme, was that faculty voices are really important, specifically talking about how you engage faculty in those key conversations through various like committees, subgroups, different ways to engage faculty in the conversations about what quality should look like, how are we going to measure it, what's it going to look like with our processes, and so on. And the last one is that the friends in high places or support from multiple stakeholders, having administrators who are very well versed and knowledgeable about what the quality initiative at the institution is important. The support must come from the top, but because they're individuals who can share that vision and move people towards some kind of a common goal. And one participant said, you know, it can't be mandated because then people get turned off. You have more success when you're working from above as well as from below. So the second theme overall was policies and practices. And here we've got templates, reviews, and streamlined processes being important because it's a way to provide some support for faculty who are very busy, another way to show how that quality assurance can be implemented, I guess, in the courses and different things that are happening. The QM as a means to an end was something that was also mentioned by several. They talk about the tools and the resources that are available as something that's helpful for reaching other goals, accreditation goals, strategic planning goals, using it as a mechanism or a tool to move things forward at the institution. Friendly competition was also mentioned by several. As well as celebration being important. But, you know, really talking about this competitive nature that exists between faculty, between departments, between colleges, between administrators at different institutions even, talking about how presenting at various leadership retreats, meetings, department meetings, and so on, just to talk about what others are doing, who got something certified, how professional development got done. Those are all ways to just kind of leverage a little bit of that competition. But it also, you can't forget to celebrate the achievements that have happened. So public celebration is a motivational thing that can be done. The culture shift. Oh, okay. We'll jump to culture shift. Shifts in culture, many talked about that happening very slowly. Baby steps by many is what they talked about. And incremental change being something that works better than trying to force something to happen quickly. Shifting the perspective was another sub theme that they talked about. Shifting the perspective, shifting the language, thinking about how people talk about things at their institution was another part of culture shift. So let's just jump to, that last one, the barriers and disruptors. A lot of the interviewees talked about losing momentum at some point, often because of changes in personnel, keep people at the top, keep people in the implementation area. That could be a barrier. It also could be a way to gain momentum when they got somebody new who was very knowledgeable about quality assurance. But barriers of different types, much as you all shared earlier, were common for the interviewees. And disruptive events can be another big sticking point. I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic and what that's done has certainly been a significant disruptor across the board. So the main recommendations that came out of this is that choosing the right person to lead the effort is critical, and and including stakeholders, as we've already mentioned. The success overall seems to be deeply influenced by the level of knowledge of and the passion within that person who's driving this initiative. They need to be able to have these crucial conversations with various stakeholder groups, bring other people on board. And so choosing that individual is really key. Using faculty voices where you can, making it a faculty inclusive practice to help faculty better understand what the quality standards are about, how that doesn't infringe on their autonomy in their courses, but bring them to the table to talk about what their institution's goals and vision might be. And a last recommendation listed here is that administrative and financial support is really critical. Again, not being top down, but something that involves multiple stakeholders across the board. And has been mentioned in a couple of ways, supporting faculty with templates, good design processes, the instructional designers, and so on is really important. Creating an inclusive collegial process for looking at courses, for instance, and helping to streamline things to make it easier for faculty. Again, including those multiple stakeholders and as in conjunction with this institutional strategy is part of what's necessary to really create a culture shift. You need to have everyone involved from the start, and that faculty need a strong voice throughout in planning and implementation both. And the last recommendation here is that there's an effort made to really shine the light on the good things people are doing, have policies that reward the work faculty are doing in promotion and tenure, for instance, celebrate the successes publicly at different kinds of college events to really showcase the achievement that different individuals have had. So we wanted to take a few minutes at the end to try and save a few minutes for you to think about what additional recommendations would you make to improve successes with QM implementation? If you want to put that in the chat, or maybe what questions do you have?
Yeah, so as Beth was saying, we've now, we started off talking about the research that supported this. I think you can see that the findings from this study, and we're going to continue on, the findings though from this level of the study really do support what we found in the research on change management, on quality assurance. So how is this playing out at your institution? Do you have, other ways that we didn't talk about that really have aided your success or have assisted implementation? Or do you have questions about implementation and specifically how that works for QM at your campus? And while you're doing that, I'll just give you a little preview. So I mentioned that this was a mixed methods research project that we're talking about now, and had a quantitative and a qualitative portion. So what we're doing now is we are refining and revising that quantitative survey so that we can send it out to all QMCs, hopefully next year, and really see how implementation plays out at all different types of institutions, regardless of where you are in terms of your activity, or regardless of where you might be on that continuum. So anybody, now I know you're doing something with QM at your institution. So tell me in the chat, what has worked? What has helped the implementation? Or if maybe you've encountered a barrier that you simply can't get past, you can share that as well. Templates for the syllabus, having that LMS or that course shell, absolutely. And truthfully, that just keeps coming up, right? Whether we're looking at implementation or what faculty say, individually is supporting them in their work. So if this is something you have not yet looked at your institution, creating that shell, right? And what I mean by that is faculty are able to design their course, make their pedagogical choices within that shell, but it gives them a good organization, a good layout, a good left-hand navigation system. It links to supports for tutoring, online library services, all those things that faculty should not have to spend their time doing and learning. Okay, how to create a dynamic syllabus template that pushes updates to all those instances, right? And part of this too is, yes, thinking through the technology aspects of that maintenance. So what some institutions have done for those online student support services, for example, that we often put in our syllabus, you can put on one page on your institutional site, wherever it belongs. And that way you only have to update that page. But what faculty get is that link to put in their syllabus, or that link to put in their course. Making sure that templates and course shells are not mandatory, right? Having that distance education committee. Okay, adopted online course practices. Okay, yes, I actually, so Denise, I actually wrote that checklist. That's too funny. Yeah, so we have a checklist that's publicly available on Kent State's website. That was my previous institution. So that's nice to know it's being utilized. Wow. does my heart good. Okay. Having the right stakeholders involved. Absolutely. I could not agree more with that. You need to not just have an inclusive table, but the right people at the table. Absolutely. And as Beth is saying, that's exactly what the interviewees told us. Distributing those responsibilities across the team instead of relying on one single QMC. So all of you truthfully are echoing everything that we found, you know, in terms of what those qualitative folks were saying, in terms of what we found in the survey as well. So this is great. It really just further supports what we're finding. So again, the next steps are we're going to expand this and really look at implementation more broadly at all types of institutions with the differing goals. We're also working to develop new and additional resources here at QM for you, professional development, all these types of things. So we're not just doing this research for the sake of research, we're doing it to better develop additional supports and resources for you for this work. So that's why we need to continuously hear from you. So if next year you get an email from me and saying, here's that next iteration of that survey that we talked about, if you're the QMC, please do take your time to fill it out, because I want you to know we use every piece of feedback that you give us. So Kevin, did we end? We did. We ended right on time.
You all did great. Yes, absolutely.
High five.
Virtual high five to everyone.
Yes,
Thank
awesome.
you. Thank you all so much. It was a wonderful presentation. And if I can encourage everyone to, a survey will pop up. If you can please fill out the survey, it'll help the presenters and it'll help QM. Thank you so much. And good luck, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate you attending.